The night sky stretched endlessly over the desolate plains, stars like scattered diamonds against a velvet backdrop, as Margaret Reed fought to stay awake at the reins of her weathered wagon. Her knuckles, white and cracked from the harsh journey, gripped the worn leather with determination that belied her exhaustion. 3 days without proper sleep had left her hollow-eyed and desperate, the weight of her 4 children's lives pressing down on her shoulders with each creaking turn of the wheels. The year was 1852, and the Oregon Trail had proven far more merciless than the stories told back in Illinois. Margaret's husband Thomas had succumbed to cholera just east of Fort Laramie, leaving her alone to guide their family west toward a promise that seemed to grow more distant with each passing mile. The children Emma, age 10, James, 7, Sarah, 5, and little Benjamin, barely 3, had finally fallen into exhausted slumber in the back of the wagon, huddled together against the spring night's chill. Just a little further, Margaret whispered to herself, though her body screamed for rest. The 2 oxen trudged forward with plodding steps, their strength waning like her own. She had pushed too hard today, desperate to reach the next water source before supplies ran out completely. Now, with darkness enveloping the trail and her vision blurring, she knew she had made a grave miscalculation. The wagon wheel hit a deep rut, jerking violently. Margaret fought to control the startled oxen as the wagon listed dangerously to one side. A small cry from the back told her at least one child had awakened. "Mama," Emma's sleepy voice called out. "It's all right, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." Margaret tried to keep the strain from her voice as she guided the wagon to what appeared to be level ground. She climbed down stiffly, her legs nearly buckling beneath her as they touched solid earth. The wheel wasn't broken, thank Providence, but the strain on the axle worried her. They could continue no further tonight. Margaret unhitched the oxen with practiced movements, though her fingers fumbled with the leather straps. She secured them to graze on the sparse grass nearby and stumbled back to check on her children. All 4 had somehow remained asleep through the jostling, their small bodies intertwined for warmth beneath the single woolen blanket they shared. The sight of them so vulnerable, so trusting in her protection, brought a fresh wave of despair. Their supplies were dwindling. The money sewn into her skirt hem would sustain them only if they reached civilization soon. She had no idea how far the next settlement might be. Margaret slumped against the wagon wheel, too exhausted even to climb inside. She would rest, just for a moment, before building a small fire. Just a moment to gather her strength. When Margaret next opened her eyes, dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon. She jerked upright, panic seizing her chest. She had fallen asleep exposed on the open plain. Her hand flew to the knife at her belt as her eyes darted around, searching for threats. Instead, she found something altogether unexpected. A small fire crackled nearby, carefully built and tended. Beside it sat a man, his broad-shouldered silhouette unmistakably that of a cowboy, from the worn hat tipped low over his face to the scuffed boots stretched toward the flames. He was cooking something in a small pan, the scent of coffee and bacon reaching her nostrils and causing her stomach to clench painfully. Margaret's movement caught his attention. He turned, revealing a weathered face framed by a neatly trimmed beard streaked with premature gray. Deep-set eyes regarded her steadily. "Good morning, madam," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Hope you don't mind the company. Saw your wagon as I was passing through. Looked like you could use some help." Margaret struggled to her feet, keenly aware of how vulnerable she had been. "My children are safe and sleeping sound," he assured her, gesturing toward the wagon. "Night got cold. I covered them with my spare blanket." Margaret peered into the wagon bed. True to his word, her children were tucked beneath not 1 but 2 blankets now, their thin woolen cover supplemented by a thick buffalo hide that certainly hadn't been there when she'd last checked on them. "I'm Matthew Taylor," the stranger continued, returning his attention to the fire. "Was heading to Fort Hall when I spotted your camp. No fire, no guard. Thought I'd better check." He didn't add what they both knew, that a lone woman and 4 children made for easy prey on the frontier. Margaret straightened her spine, summoning whatever dignity remained after being caught so careless. Margaret Reed, my husband, he's no longer with us. We're bound for Oregon. Matthew nodded, asking no questions about her husband's absence. Oregon's still a fair piece west, Mrs. Reed. Not a journey to make alone. I have no choice, Margaret replied, the edge in her voice daring him to suggest otherwise. To her surprise, he simply nodded again. Reckon that's so. Coffee's ready if you'd like some. He poured the steaming liquid into a tin cup and held it out to her. Margaret hesitated only briefly before accepting. The warmth against her palms was almost as reviving as the first bitter sip. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Matthew, please. She studied him over the rim of her cup. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his rifle well-maintained where it rested within easy reach. Most telling was the gentle way he'd tucked in her children without waking them a kindness unexpected from a stranger. That wheel's looking poorly, Matthew observed, nodding toward the wagon. Axle, too, won't make it far without repairs. Margaret's heart sank. She knew nothing of wagon repairs, had been hoping to reach a trading post or settlement where help could be found. How far to the nearest town? Settlements are scarce in these parts. Trading post at Chimney Rock is about 3 days' ride. He hesitated. But I've got tools. Could help you shore it up enough to get there safely. Suspicion flared in Margaret. She'd encountered enough men on this journey to know that offers of help often came with unspoken expectations. And what would you want in return, Mr. Taylor? His eyes met hers directly. Nothing you're worried about, Mrs. Reed. Just the satisfaction of knowing 4 children and their mother made it safely to Oregon. Before she could respond, a small voice called from the wagon. Mama. Little Benjamin's tousled head appeared above the wagon side, his eyes wide at the sight of a stranger. The other children stirred behind him, Emma immediately taking a protective stance before her younger siblings. It's all right, Margaret called, moving quickly to the wagon. This is Mr. Taylor, he's helping us. Matthew touched the brim of his hat in greeting. Morning, young ones, hope you're hungry, got bacon and beans for breakfast. James's stomach growled audibly, breaking the tension. Sarah giggled, and even Emma's wariness softened slightly. As Matthew served breakfast portions more generous than Margaret could have provided, she observed how he spoke to her children. He addressed even little Benjamin with respect, answering the boy's curious questions about his horse and gun with patient good humor. When James asked about Indians, Matthew corrected the boy's misconceptions gently, speaking of the various tribes with knowledge and respect. By mid-morning, Matthew had examined the wagon thoroughly. Axles cracked but not broken through. Could reinforce it, might hold till Fort Hall where you can get proper repairs. How long would that take? Margaret asked, already calculating their dwindling supplies. Day, maybe 2 with proper materials. He straightened, dusting his hands on his trousers. There's a small creek about half a mile west. Good water, better shelter than here. I suggest we move your camp there while I ride to find what we need for repairs. Margaret weighed her options carefully. Trust didn't come easily after months on the trail, yet this man had already proven himself honorable when he could have taken advantage of their vulnerability. Very well, she agreed finally. We'll move to the creek. The new campsite proved far superior. A small grove of cottonwoods provided shade, the creek offered clear water, and a natural rock formation created a windbreak. Matthew helped establish their camp before preparing to depart. I'll be back by sundown tomorrow, he promised, checking his saddlebags. Stay close to camp. Keep your rifle handy, though I doubt you'll need it. This area's quiet. Margaret nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. The children especially had brightened in his presence. Benjamin clung to Matthew's leg until the man knelt to his level. I need you to be the man of the camp while I'm gone, Matthew told him seriously. Help your mama and watch over your sisters. Benjamin nodded solemnly, chest puffing with importance. Matthew ruffled his hair before mounting his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding. Mr. Taylor, Margaret called as he turned to leave. When he looked back, she found herself momentarily at a loss for words. Thank you, she said finally. He touched his hat brim. Lock up tight tonight, Mrs. Reed. Then he was gone, riding west with purpose, leaving Margaret with a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. She turned to her children, forcing brightness into her voice. Well then, let's make this camp proper. Emma, help me gather firewood. James, you and Sarah can Mama, Emma interrupted, her young face serious beyond her years. Is Mr. Taylor going to stay with us now, like Papa used to? The question caught Margaret off guard. No, sweetheart, he's just helping us reach the trading post, then he'll go his own way. But why? Benjamin asked, lower lip trembling. I like him. Margaret gathered her youngest into her arms. Because that's how things are, darling. Mr. Taylor has his own journey. Even as she said it, she felt an unexpected pang at the thought of Matthew Taylor riding out of their lives as suddenly as he had entered. She shook off the feeling as foolishness born of exhaustion and fear. One didn't build hopes on chance encounters in the wilderness. Yet when the children fell asleep that night, huddled together beneath Matthew's buffalo hide, Margaret found herself watching the western horizon, waiting for a rider who wouldn't return until tomorrow. True to his word, Matthew appeared the following evening, his horse laden with supplies. The children ran to greet him, Benjamin racing ahead with surprising speed for his short legs. Whoa there, young man, Matthew laughed, swinging down from his saddle. Let me get unburdened first. Margaret noticed immediately that he looked tired, his face dusty from hard riding. You found what we needed, and then some. He began unpacking, tools, iron strapping, nails, and to the children's delight small packets of sugar candy. Had to ride farther than expected, found a homestead willing to part with some supplies. As the children exclaimed over their treats, Margaret took stock of the repair materials. This must have cost a small fortune. Matthew shrugged, made a fair trade. They needed ammunition more than iron strapping. She didn't believe him entirely but let it pass. You must be exhausted. Rest while I prepare supper. He nodded gratefully, settling beside the fire. Within minutes, his chin had dropped to his chest, exhaustion claiming him. Margaret motioned for the children to play quietly as she prepared a stew from their meager supplies, supplemented by the fresh rabbit Matthew had brought. She watched him sleep, this stranger who had appeared when they needed him most. His face in repose looked younger, the lines of vigilance softened. Whatever drove Matthew Taylor across the frontier alone seemed momentarily at rest. When supper was ready, she hesitated to wake him, but his eyes opened at her approach as if some part of him remained ever vigilant. Smells good, he said, straightening. It's not much, Margaret apologized, but he accepted the bowl with genuine appreciation. As they ate, Matthew shared news gleaned during his supply run. War's brewing back east from what I hear. States arguing over slavery and territory. We left to escape such troubles, Margaret sighed. Thomas, my husband, believed Oregon would offer a fresh start, away from the divisions tearing at the country. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. Wise man, your husband. After a pause, he asked gently, how long ago did you lose him? 6 weeks, Margaret answered, surprised to find she could speak of it without her voice breaking. Cholera took him quickly. We buried him near Fort Laramie and continued on as he would have wanted. That takes courage, Matthew said simply. Margaret looked at her children, now playing a quiet game by the wagon. They give me courage. I have no choice but to be strong for them. Everyone has a choice, Mrs. Reed. Many would have turned back. You chose the harder path. His understanding, free of pity, touched something in Margaret that had been frozen since Thomas's death. She blinked rapidly, turning away before he could see the sudden moisture in her eyes. Tomorrow we'll fix that wagon, Matthew continued, allowing her the moment to compose herself. Should be ready to travel by the following morning. She nodded, unable to express the conflicting emotions his words evoked relief that they could continue their journey safely, yet dismay that their paths would soon diverge. Over the next day, Matthew worked tirelessly on the wagon. James appointed himself assistant, handing tools and asking endless questions that Matthew answered with remarkable patience. Even Emma, usually reserved around strangers, especially men, began to warm to him as he taught her to identify edible plants near the creek. Margaret found herself watching their interactions with a mixture of gratitude and wistfulness. Thomas had been a good father but often stern, believing children should be seen and not heard. Matthew's gentle manner with them revealed a different approach, one that drew out their natural curiosity and confidence. By evening, the wagon repairs were nearly complete. She'll hold, Matthew announced, wiping sweat from his brow. Not forever, mind you. You'll want proper repairs at Fort Hall, but this will get you there. How can I ever repay you? Margaret asked as they sat by the fire after the children had fallen asleep. Matthew stared into the flames. No need, anyone would have done the same. No, Margaret said firmly, not anyone. Most would have passed by or worse. He glanced at her, then back at the fire. Perhaps I needed the stopping as much as you needed the help. Something in his tone invited questions, but Margaret sensed he wasn't ready to answer them. Instead, she asked, will you tell me about Fort Hall? What should we expect? Matthew described the trading post, a Hudson's Bay Company establishment that had become an important stopover for emigrants on the Oregon Trail. It's no city, but after weeks on the trail, it'll seem like one. You can restock supplies there, get information about the trail conditions ahead. And you, where will you go after Fort Hall? He hesitated. I haven't decided. I've been ranging these territories for 5 years now. Sometimes I think about settling somewhere, but the open country calls you, Margaret finished for him. Matthew looked at her with surprise, as if she'd glimpsed something he hadn't expected her to see. Something like that, though lately the calling's grown fainter. The crackling fire filled the silence between them, sparks spiraling upward to join the stars. Margaret felt a connection forming, delicate as spiderweb but surprisingly resilient. This man understood the pull of the frontier, the promise of new beginnings that had drawn her family westward. Thomas spoke often of building a farm in the Willamette Valley, she said quietly. Fruit trees and wheat fields, a place where our children could grow up free from the troubles brewing back east. A good dream, Matthew nodded. Oregon's green country, different from here, more forgiving. Have you been there, passed through, never stayed long enough to see things grow? There was regret in his voice. Margaret gathered her courage. You could come with us, at least to Oregon City. The children, they've grown fond of you. Matthew's eyes met hers across the fire, and for a moment, she glimpsed longing there before he masked it. Best not to make plans too far ahead on the frontier, Mrs. Reed. Let's get you safely to Fort Hall first. She nodded, accepting his gentle evasion while noting he hadn't outright refused. It was foolish anyway, she told herself. A widow with 4 children was hardly a tempting prospect for a free-ranging cowboy. Morning brought clear skies and the final preparations for departure. Matthew checked and double-checked the wagon repairs, tested the oxen's harnesses, and helped load their meager possessions. Keep to the main trail, he advised as Margaret climbed onto the wagon seat. You should reach Fort Hall in about 2 weeks if the weather holds. You're not coming with us, James asked, his disappointment evident. Matthew knelt to the boy's level. I've got some business to attend to first, but Fort Hall isn't so far. Perhaps our paths will cross again. Benjamin's face crumpled. Don't want you to go. Before Margaret could intervene, Matthew scooped the little boy up. Now listen here, Benjamin Reed. You're the man of this family alongside your brother. Your mama and sisters are counting on you to be brave. The little boy sniffled but nodded solemnly. Matthew set him gently in the wagon, then turned to Margaret. You've got a fine family, Mrs. Reed. It's been an honor to help you. Matthew, she said, dropping formality in these final moments, we wouldn't have made it without you, if you ever find yourself in Oregon's Willamette Valley. He touched his hat brim, a smile warming his eyes. I'll remember. With a final wave to the children, Matthew mounted his horse and watched as Margaret snapped the reins, setting the oxen in motion. The wagon creaked forward, wheels turning steadily on the rutted trail. Margaret didn't look back, though every fiber of her being wanted to. She focused instead on the trail ahead, on the journey that still lay before them. Fort Hall first, then the difficult crossing of the Snake River, the Blue Mountains, and finally the Columbia River that would lead them to Oregon. She could not afford distractions or regrets, yet as they made camp that evening, Margaret found herself scanning the horizon, half expecting to see a lone rider approaching. The children were subdued, even Benjamin unusually quiet as he picked at his supper. Will we ever see Mr. Taylor again, Mama? Sarah asked as Margaret tucked them in for the night. I don't know, sweetheart. The frontier is vast. I think we will, Emma declared with surprising conviction. He looked at you the way Papa used to. Margaret brushed her daughter's hair back, unsure how to respond. Had Matthew looked at her that way? She'd been too consumed with survival to notice such things. Yet now, alone with her thoughts as the children slept, she allowed herself to remember the warmth in his eyes, the gentle respect in his voice. For 3 days, they traveled steadily westward. The repaired wagon held, though Margaret constantly checked the reinforced axle at each stop, hearing Matthew's instructions in her mind. The trail became more traveled as they approached Fort Hall, occasionally passing other wagons or riders heading in both directions. On the 4th evening, as Margaret prepared their camp beside a small stream, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her hand went to the rifle propped against the wagon wheel, but the children's excited cries made her turn. "It's Mr. Taylor," James shouted, already running toward the approaching rider. Matthew dismounted, barely having time to steady himself before Benjamin hurled his small body forward for an embrace. "Whoa there, seems I've been missed." Margaret stood frozen by the cook fire, emotions colliding within her relief, joy, confusion. "Matthew." He looked up, Benjamin still clinging to his leg. "Mrs. Reed, hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she managed, struggling to maintain composure. "We're just surprised to see you." "Thought I'd make sure that Axel was holding up," he said casually, though his eyes held something more. "And I remembered the little ones were running low on sugar candy." The children cheered at this news, but Margaret sensed there was more to his return than concern for wagon repairs or sweet treats. Once the initial excitement settled and the children were occupied with the small gifts Matthew had brought, she found a moment to speak with him privately. "The axle is fine," she said quietly. "Why are you really here?" Matthew studied the ground before meeting her gaze directly. "Couldn't stop thinking about you, all of you out here alone. Tried to continue my journey, but..." He shook his head. "Guess I've grown attached to this little band of travelers." Margaret's heart quickened. "We've missed you too," she admitted. "The children especially." Just the children. The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Before she could answer, Emma called for help with the cooking pot, breaking the moment. Matthew stayed for supper, regaling the children with tales of his travels, while Margaret quietly observed the easy rapport he'd established with her family in such a short time. As darkness fell, and the children prepared for sleep, Matthew approached Margaret by the fire. "I'd like your permission to accompany you to Fort Hall, Mrs. Reed. The trail gets more dangerous from here. There have been reports of bandits preying on lone wagons." Relief flooded through her, though pride made her ask. "And after Fort Hall?" Matthew's gaze was steady. "One step at a time." "But I'm not in any hurry to say goodbye again." For the first time since Thomas's death, Margaret felt a glimmer of hope for something beyond mere survival. "We'd welcome your company, Mr. Taylor." The journey to Fort Hall took 11 more days, during which Matthew proved invaluable not just for protection, but for the knowledge he shared. He taught James how to set snares for rabbits, showed Emma which plants could be used for medicine, entertained Sarah with stories of frontier history, and carried Benjamin on his shoulders when the little boy grew tired of the wagon's confines. Margaret watched their growing bonds with a mixture of joy and trepidation. The children needed a father figure, especially the boys, but she feared they were setting themselves up for heartbreak when Matthew eventually continued on his own path. Yet as the days passed, she found herself drawn to him in ways that went beyond gratitude. His quiet strength, the thoughtful way he considered his words before speaking, his unexpected gentleness with her children all revealed a man of depth and character. In the evenings, after the children slept, they would talk by the fire, sharing pieces of their lives before the trail had brought them together. She learned he had grown up in Kentucky, the son of a horse breeder. Had fought briefly in the Mexican War before drifting west, working as a scout, a ranch hand, occasionally a lawman when settlements needed one. He spoke little of family, and Margaret sensed old wounds there that he wasn't ready to reveal. In turn, she told him of her life in Illinois, her marriage to Thomas at 18, the struggle to make their small farm profitable as the children came one after another. Thomas's decision to sell everything for the Oregon journey had been born of desperation as much as dreams, their land too poor to support a growing family, the specter of civil unrest growing darker with each passing year. Thomas was a good man. she said one evening. Not perfect, he had a temper when things went wrong, and he was stubborn to a fault. But he loved the children, worked himself to exhaustion for us. Matthew nodded. Sounds like a man who knew what mattered. He would have liked you, Margaret said, surprising herself with the certainty of it. He always respected men who could survive on their own but chose to help others. They reached Fort Hall on a clear autumn day, the trading post's stockade walls a welcome sight after weeks on the trail. The settlement bustled with activity, wagons coming and going, traders hawking supplies, emigrants exchanging information about trail conditions ahead. Matthew helped them secure a camping spot near the fort, then arranged for proper repairs to the wagon. While the children marveled at the relative civilization of the trading post, Margaret took stock of their supplies and finances. "We'll need flour, coffee, and salt at minimum," she murmured, counting the coins remaining from Thomas's carefully hoarded savings. "Maybe ammunition if the price isn't too dear. Let me help," Matthew offered quietly. Pride stiffened her spine. "We can manage, Margaret." It was the first time he'd used her given name so directly. "I know you can manage. You've proven that 100 times over." But there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered freely. She met his gaze, seeing no pity there, only respect and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Why are you doing this, Matthew? Truly?" He was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his words. "Because in 5 years of wandering, I've never met anyone like you. Because those children deserve every chance at the future their father dreamed for them. And because—" he took a breath. "Because for the first time since I can remember, I'm thinking about tomorrow instead of just getting through today." The honest vulnerability in his admission touched Margaret deeply. This was no empty flattery or attempt to assume control. Matthew Taylor was offering something far more precious, his genuine self, with all its uncertainties and hopes. "All right," she said softly. "We'll accept your help to Fort Vancouver. After that, we'll see what tomorrow brings." His smile warmed her more than the autumn sun. "That's all I ask." Fort Hall proved a turning point in their journey. The wagon received proper repairs, their supplies were replenished, and Margaret gathered valuable information about the difficult trail sections that lay ahead. Most emigrants were choosing to continue by rafting down the Columbia River rather than taking the treacherous Barlow Road over the Cascade Mountains, especially with winter approaching. Matthew agreed this was wisest. The river route is challenging but safer this time of year. "We can arrange passage on a barge at Fort Boys." Margaret noted his use of "we" without comment, but a quiet hope was taking root in her heart. They departed Fort Hall in better condition than they had arrived, the wagon sturdy, supplies plentiful, and spirits high. Matthew now rode alongside rather than ahead, often joining Margaret on the wagon seat while the children played or napped in the back. On their third day out from Fort Hall, they encountered a small caravan heading to California Gold Country. The leader, a boisterous man named Harmon, invited them to join forces until their paths diverged. "Safety in numbers," he declared. "Indians been restless along the Snake." Matthew exchanged a look with Margaret. "Your decision," he said. "More protection, but we'd have to match their pace." She considered briefly. "We'll join them. The children would benefit from other company." The arrangement proved fortunate. Within the caravan's protective circle, the children blossomed, making friends with the few other youngsters. Even Emma, usually so serious, laughed as she played tag around the wagons during evening stops. Margaret, too, found comfort in the company of other women, particularly Abigail Winters, a no-nonsense matron traveling with her grown sons to join her husband in Sacramento. "Your Matthew watches over you proper," Abigail observed one evening as they prepared supper. "Not many men would take on another man's family. He's not. We're not." Margaret stammered, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Abigail raised an eyebrow. "Might not be yet, but anyone with eyes can see the way you two orbit each other. Life's too short and too hard out here to deny comfort when it's offered honestly." The blunt assessment left Margaret thoughtful. She had been holding part of herself back, partly out of loyalty to Thomas, partly from fear of depending on anyone again after losing him so suddenly. Yet Matthew had proven himself steadfast. Perhaps Abigail was right, perhaps she was denying them both something precious out of misplaced caution. That evening, as the caravan's campfires burned low and most had retired to their wagons, Margaret found Matthew sitting alone, whittling a small wooden horse. "For Benjamin," he explained as she sat beside him. "Thought he might like something to remember this journey." The simple gesture of thoughtfulness moved her. "You've become very important to him, to all of them." Matthew set down his knife, and to you, the directness of his question demanded equal honesty. "Yes, Matthew, to me as well." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I've been thinking about Oregon, about what might come after." Margaret's heart quickened. "Have you? I'm not a farmer by trade, but I'm willing to learn. I know horses, could breed and train them alongside whatever crops you decide to grow." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "That is, if you'd consider having me around permanently." "Are you asking to court me, Matthew Taylor?" Margaret asked, voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, the firelight catching the silver in his beard. "I believe I am, Margaret Reed, though we've done things backward, traveling together before I properly asked." She laughed softly. "Nothing about this journey has followed conventional paths." Growing serious, she added, "The children come first always. They've lost so much already." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Matthew assured her. "I'm not looking to replace their father, just hoping to earn a place in their lives and yours." Margaret studied his face, this man who had appeared when they needed him most, and had steadily proven his worth not through grand gestures, but through consistent care and respect. "I think I'd like that very much." The days that followed held a new sweetness. Though nothing outwardly changed in their arrangements, Matthew still slept apart from the wagon, still maintained proper distance in the presence of others. There was an understanding between them now, a shared anticipation of possibilities ahead. The children sensed the shift. Emma approached Margaret one morning as they gathered firewood. "Are you going to marry Mr. Taylor, Mama?" Margaret nearly dropped her armload of kindling. "What makes you ask that?" Emma shrugged with the worldly wisdom only a 10-year-old could muster. "You smile different when he's around. And he looks at you the way the princes look at princesses in my storybook." "Would it upset you if I did?" Margaret asked carefully. "Not right away, but someday." Emma considered this seriously. "Papa would want you to be happy, and Mr. Taylor makes you happy, I can tell." "He does," Margaret admitted, "but you children will always come first." "I know," Emma said simply. "That's why Mr. Taylor will be a good new papa, because he puts us first too." From the mouths of babes, Margaret thought, marveling at her daughter's perception. The caravan reached Fort Boys in early October. Here, their paths would diverge from Harmon's group, who continued south toward California while the Reed family prepared for the final leg to Oregon. "Rivers running high but navigable," Matthew reported after inquiring about passage. "Found a barge captain willing to take us as far as the Dalles. From there, it's overland to Oregon City." "When do we leave?" Margaret asked, watching the children play with their caravan friends one last time. 2 days, gives us time to prepare and rest." He hesitated. "There's something else." "I spoke with the fort's chaplain." Margaret looked at him questioningly. "He's authorized to perform marriages," Matthew said, his usual confidence faltering slightly. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but winter's coming, and when we reach Oregon, you'll be applying for a land grant. As a married couple, we'd qualify for more acreage." "Is that your only reason for suggesting marriage now?" Margaret asked, unable to keep a hint of teasing from her voice. Matthew's expression grew serious. "You know it isn't. I love you, Margaret. I love your children. I want to build a life with all of you, not someday, but starting now." The simple declaration, spoken without flowery sentiment but with absolute conviction, touched Margaret more deeply than any practiced proposal could have. This was Matthew, straightforward, honest, practical, yet deeply caring. "What would this mean for the children, legally?" she asked, practical concerns surfacing even as her heart had already decided. "I'd formally adopt them, with your blessing. They'd bear my name unless you prefer they keep Reed to honor their father." She considered this. "Perhaps both." "Reed Taylor, a bridge between past and future." Matthew nodded, understanding her meaning perfectly. "I'd be honored." "Then yes," Margaret said, the decision feeling right in every way. "I'll marry you, Matthew Taylor, not for land grants or legal protections, though those matter, but because I love you, and because together we can give these children the future Thomas and I dreamed for them. They were married 2 days later in the small chapel at Fort Boys, the children standing witness alongside Abigail Winters, who had delayed her departure to attend. Benjamin served as ring-bearer, proudly carrying the simple gold band Matthew had somehow procured from a trader at the fort. Emma and Sarah scattered wildflowers gathered from nearby fields, while James stood tall beside Matthew, self-appointed best man at 10 years old. Margaret wore her cleanest dress, her hair freshly washed and braided with ribbons the girls had chosen. Matthew had shaved his beard and donned a new shirt, looking almost uncomfortable in such relative finery. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the chaplain's words about joining lives on life's journey particularly fitting for their circumstances. When Matthew kissed her, their first real kiss, Margaret felt a sense of homecoming she hadn't expected to find again after Thomas's death. Reed Taylor's. Benjamin announced proudly at the small celebration afterward, testing his new hyphenated surname with obvious delight. Their departure from Fort Boys the next morning felt like the beginning of a new journey rather than the continuation of the old. The barge that would carry them down the Snake River to the Columbia was sturdy if not comfortable, their wagon and oxen secured alongside several others making the same passage. Next stop, Oregon City, Matthew told the children as they watched Fort Boys recede behind them. Your mama's dream is just weeks away now. Our dream, Margaret corrected, standing beside her new husband, his arms steady around her waist. Ours now. The river journey proved challenging but faster than overland travel. Rapids occasionally forced them to portage sections, the men of the various families working together to move wagons and goods around dangerous stretches. Matthew's strength and river knowledge proved invaluable, earning the respect of their fellow travelers. At the Dalles, they faced their final choice attempt, the dangerous Barlow Road over Mount Hood or continue by river through the treacherous Cascade Rapids. The road would be easier on the children, Matthew suggested as they discussed options. River's dangerous this time of year. But slower, Margaret countered. Winter will catch us if we delay. After careful consideration and consultation with more experienced travelers, they chose the river route. Their wagon was partially dismantled, the parts to be reassembled in Oregon City, while their possessions and the children would travel by boat. The passage through the Columbia River Gorge left Margaret breathless, not just from fear of the churning rapids, but from the majestic beauty of the towering cliffs and dense forests rising from the river's edge. This was wilder, grander than anything she had imagined when dreaming of Oregon from their small Illinois farm. It's like the landscape itself is welcoming us, she told Matthew as they navigated a calmer stretch, the children wide-eyed with wonder at the waterfalls cascading down the gorge walls. Welcoming you home, he agreed. I felt the same the first time I passed through here. Something about this country speaks to the soul. They reached Oregon City in late October, the journey's end arriving almost anticlimactically after months of hardship and adventure. The settlement sprawled along the Willamette River, far larger than Margaret had imagined, with proper buildings, businesses, and streets laid out in orderly fashion. As Matthew helped them disembark, an official approached with a ledger. New arrivals, names please for the territorial registry. Matthew Taylor, Matthew stated clearly, with wife Margaret and children Emma, James, Sarah, and Benjamin Reed Taylor. The simple declaration, so matter-of-fact yet so profound in its meaning, brought tears to Margaret's eyes. They had arrived not just at their geographical destination, but at the beginning of their life together. Their first weeks in Oregon City passed in a whirl of activity. Matthew's knowledge of horses quickly earned him work at the local livery, while Margaret and the children established their temporary home in a small rented cabin. They filed claims for land in the fertile Willamette Valley, their status as a family with young children giving them priority under the Donation Land Claim Act. By spring, they had secured 320 acres of prime valley land, with timber for building, water access, and rich soil ready for planting. Matthew proved as good as his word, learning farming alongside his natural horsemanship, the two skills complementing each other as they established their homestead. The cabin they built that first summer was larger than Margaret had dared hope, 3 rooms to start, with plans for expansion as the family's needs grew. Matthew insisted on proper windows, bringing glass all the way from Portland at considerable expense. "Children need sunlight," he said simply when Margaret protested the extravagance. She watched him with the children, marveling at how seamlessly he had integrated into their lives. With James, he was patient teacher and role model, showing the boy how to become the man he would someday be. With the girls, he was protector, but also champion of their intelligence and capabilities, never suggesting their dreams should be smaller because of their gender. And with Benjamin, he was playmate, storyteller, and steadying presence, everything the youngest had needed since losing his birth father at such a tender age. One evening, as summer gave way to autumn and their first harvest was safely stored, Margaret joined Matthew on the porch of their new home. The children were already asleep inside, exhausted from a day of helping neighbors with their harvest celebration. "Happy?" Matthew asked, his arm drawing her close against the evening chill. Margaret surveyed their land, the fields now stubbled after harvest, the small orchard planted in spring, the barn where 2 mares already carried foals that would form the beginning of Matthew's breeding program. Beyond their own boundaries, smoke rose from neighboring chimneys, evidence of the community growing around them. "More than I ever imagined possible," she answered honestly. "When Thomas died, I thought our dream died with him. I was just trying to survive to get the children somewhere safe." She turned in his arms to face him. "I never expected to find love again, never expected you." Matthew's hand gently traced her cheek, his expression tender in the fading light. "I spent years wandering, looking for something I couldn't name. Then I found a woman and her children sleeping in a wagon, vulnerable but undefeated, and I knew I'd found what I'd been searching for all along." "What was that?" Margaret asked softly. "Home," he said simply. "Not a place, but people worth promising forever to." As Matthew's lips met hers, Margaret felt the rightness of their journey, not just the physical trail that had brought them west, but the path that had led 2 wounded souls to healing through each other. The children sleeping safely inside, the land spreading fertile around them, the future unfolding with promise before them, all of it born from that fateful night when her children were sleeping in the wagon, until a cowboy covered them and promised forever.